Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob. So who is this? Is it Jim Gordon, famous rock drummer who died after killing his mother? Is it Joe Jackson, famous imitation Elvis Costello singer? Or is it Glenn Youngkin, governor of Virginia?
I was going to say it looked like a young Walter Isaacson, but that's not on the menu. Glenn Youngkin.
Correct. So here's my completely absurd train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Jackson has this song called "Won't You Be My Number Two? Me and Number One Are Through." Okay, but I have found that when you're interested in a woman and you're like the second in line, and she breaks up with number one, number two, you're dead. She never goes out with number two. Okay,
she doesn't.
Doesn't no.
You've been pursuing the wrong kind of women, Mickey. I have finally diagnosed your problem.
People aren't that.
You need rational actors. Always pursue rational actors.
It's not like they go down Maslow's hierarchy of needs and say, "Okay, I'll take number two."
I'm down to Mickey.
They're pissed off. They're depressed at the thought of going out with Mickey number two.
Yeah.
So they never go with number two. You want to be number three. Okay. Now this transfers into the presidential race. If Trump and DeSantis are going head to head, okay, we want to take out Trump. But if you take out Trump, somehow you have to give Trump the satisfaction of destroying number two, who is Ron DeSantis.
Okay.
Because you have to get him emotionally sated so he doesn't wreak havoc in the general election by urging a nationwide write-in campaign or telling his base to stay home. You have to let him get his rocks off by destroying number two. So
what you've got to say that again?
I mean, right now he's being quite effective at this at sort of dragging down DeSantis in the polls. It's a temporary thing, but
and that's a mistake to drag him down too fast. You're saying?
No, I just think the obvious compromise is you let him drag down DeSantis. Meanwhile, everybody else drags him down, and the way he can exit the race with his pride intact is to say, "I took down this asshole DeSantis who was disloyal to me, who the press was pushing." And then you move on to number three, who is somebody like Glenn Youngkin, governor of Virginia, who seems perfectly acceptable as a presidential candidate. And is not Trump and not Ron DeSantis.
So you want to provide Trump a face-saving exit, kind of?
By letting him conquer somebody.
Okay.
And that person would be DeSantis. I like DeSantis. I'd rather have DeSantis than Youngkin.
I'd like to pause and try to make sure I get the connection between your theory of women and this, but I think that would be a serious mistake.
I think that's a mistake. I've tried to make this connection. But the point is,
okay. So you
don't
want
want to be number two. You want to be number three.
I see.
Number two is the focus of all of Trump's ire. Number three is not at the moment.
Okay, but it seems to me that that's a more straightforward explanation of why you don't want to be number two, because you're gonna attract the ire of number one, who is Trump and is famously destructive. So
okay, well that you've simplified. You've simplified.
Yeah, I'm afraid we have to. We now have no need for that analogy that made no sense in the first place. I regret to inform you that your hopelessly confused analogy is even worse than hopelessly confused.
It's not completely irrelevant. Somebody breaks up with somebody. They're pissed off. They want to take it out on somebody.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I see. But this would be an argument about female psychology, which we don't want to get into.
Well, it's everybody's psychology. I don't know if it's
actually sexual psychology is the area where there's the strongest theoretical Darwinian argument for asymmetries. But I
think there is an asymmetry in this case, actually.
So Mickey,
but anyway, so that's my latest.
I think it's probably a bad time, by the way, to ask people to smash the like button, right? That doesn't make any sense. But folks, if for whatever perverse reason you're liking us right now,
I still think DeSantis is well positioned. I liked what he told Tucker Carlson about Ukraine. There was this phrase "territorial dispute," which seems to stick in people's craws, but
including
it's better.
Mine.
It's okay. It's better that you admit it's better than saying we must arm Ukraine because it is a existential fight of autocracy versus democracy, and we have to, it's vitally important to America. So it was better that he said what he said.
There are a lot of things better than that. Your analogy with women is better than that.
What's so terrible about territorial dispute? It is a territorial
come on.
dispute.
I mean, actually, it's interesting. Last week I was saying I thought that the Ukraine could well turn out to be a political liability for Biden as he heads into a general election, if, God forbid, he is a nominee. And, I said, because Republicans can say, look, you made no attempt to negotiate to head off this invasion. And then you spent a ton of money getting a ton of people killed, and the Russians have more land than they would have had if you had tried to negotiate and succeeded. And you said, I said, Biden's opponents, Republican opponents can say that. And you said, and you would say that too, right? And I said, yeah. And then afterwards I thought, but I'm not like the Republican opponents, because actually they may well not get into the part about his failure to negotiate. They just don't focus on that kind of stuff. But this is the other difference between me and them is, the right-wing version of restraint is sometimes just like dismissive of, faraway parts of the world as if they have no consequence for America. I don't believe that. And I believe the principle of territorial integrity is important. And Russia violated the sovereignty of a country. And it's actually pretty weird to think that we might have a president who refers to that as a territorial dispute. I mean, after all, Russia itself recognized Ukraine's sovereignty for many years. There's no controversy. It's not like Taiwan, where virtually nobody recognizes it. It's a little... Anyway, this is this kind of thing you often kind of hear from the right, like, oh, fuck those guys. America doesn't need to think about the faraway world. I think America does. I have other issues, as you know, with the way Biden has handled the Ukraine thing. So anyway, that's why that really stuck out when I saw it, a mere territorial dispute. And by the way, what we're talking about is Tucker Carlson asked a bunch of Republican presidential candidates to send him statements about their foreign policy vision or about Ukraine or something. And this is DeSantis's we're talking about.
I don't think, first, I don't, half of the Republican Party are neocons who think we should be vitally concerned with every little tit and jottle that happens in the whole world. So,
well, moreover, they buy the autocracy. Yeah, I mean,
not that part of the Republican Party. You're talking about the isolationist wing that says those people are far away and they're
right.
They're inferior third world cultures and fuck them.
And the trouble with the neocons is they think, yeah, it's our mission to intervene in the internal affairs of every country in the world and remake it in our image. That's the other extreme I don't like.
Well, but I don't think this, first, territorial dispute does not say, screw, they're an unimportant country and screw them. It says it's a territorial dispute that is not, we should not interfere with. It's not a vital national interest. It doesn't mean that they're not worthy countries and we can forget about them because they're the third world. It does ignore the fact that Russia invaded a country in a very aggressive way. But even that we would ignore if it was two obscure countries in Africa, one aggressed the other. We would try to solve the problem, but we wouldn't think it was a vital national interest where we had to send massive military aid. The problem is he did this on the doorstep of Europe, and that makes it a bigger deal. Well, DeSantis ignored that part, but he has plenty of time to correct it. And everything he said is completely consistent with doing exactly what we're doing and exactly what you would want him to do. He didn't say he's going to cut off aid.
Right.
He said implied he was going to nudge the Ukrainians into cutting a peace deal. He didn't say he was going to abandon them. He just said he's not going to send them F-16s. So he's right for the wrong reasons. And I think that's better than being wrong for the wrong reasons.
Well, I mean, what you're pointing to is that although kind of stylistically he came off as Trumpist, that was the tone. If you look at the substance of what he said, there wasn't all that much daylight between him and Joe Biden. Joe Biden's not sending F-16s, you know?
Right. But presumably you have some criticism of Joe Biden for not leaning hard enough on the Ukrainians, and he would endorse that. He's where you are. Your dispute with him is mainly about this one phrase territorial dispute. Which
I think it's a very significant phrase. It really does represent a difference that would manifest itself in a lot of ways between kind of
like
left
what?
of center restrainers and right of center restrainers. Well,
like what?
I mean, for example, I would work hard to secure United Nations support for condemning and even intervening in the case of a violation of sovereignty. That's all good by me. And I think, you know, these guys, first of all, barely even can stand the idea of invoking the UN to do anything. And moreover, they don't care about international law. Okay.
Right, but the number of people who care intensely about international law and make that their guiding light
is few.
Is very few. It's not. It's
even
not
on the
90,
left. I agree.
It's not 90% of the Democratic Party. Its main adherents are half of this conversation.
I'm pretty much the only person, so far as I can tell. That's true.
No, but it's a little weird to condemn him for not embracing a position that 2% of America believes in. I mean, if there were a dispute between India and China over Kashmir, which there is, you would say it's a territorial dispute. It's not in our vital national interest. You're not saying India and Kashmir are pieces of shit we shouldn't care about. We're not saying they're not important to the United States. We're saying it's a territorial dispute. It's not in our vital interest. That's a reasonable thing to do. It's not dismissive of the rest of the world.
But leave aside like borders and sovereignty. And again, I don't think the U.S. should intervene if it isn't sanctioned under international law, as we did in Iraq, as we did in Kosovo and so on. But leave all that aside, just the idea of engagement in the world. I mean, I'm sure I could list 5 initiatives I think we should pursue wholeheartedly, having to do with, constraining like weapons in space or bioweapons or various things. And for that reason, cultivating better relations with China so we can get this shit done and so on, where, I don't even know where DeSantis is. He's posing kind of as a Trumpist. So I'll just talk about the Trumpist foreign policy view, which I know is disdainful of global governance. And in many of the cases I'm citing, they'd say, no, fuck that shit. We're going to dominate space, man. And they just don't see genuine connections between America's self-interest and cultivating the rule of law without all the hypocrisy that has characterized our traditional so-called cultivation of it, and doing various other things. Like vaccines. There's a little item today in today's Nonzero newsletter. That's this week's plug of it, about a bunch of international notables signed a letter saying that next time we should more aggressively curtail international property protection so we can get the vaccines out to the world. People on the right tend not to care about this shit.
Well, but nothing in the first. We don't know that much about what Trump's actual specifics are in terms of his Ukraine policy. Mm-hmm. Second, you're attacking Trump, not DeSantis. DeSantis is a blank slate. For all we know, he would go gung-ho for a vaccine
that's the
policy,
thing.
And nothing in territorial dispute says he wouldn't. You would still characterize India versus China as a territorial dispute, even if you wanted to have a global vaccine program, okay? He's obviously not going to buy into world government. I agree. He's not going to buy into international law. I agree.
World government is not the phrase. It's global governance, but go ahead.
I thought you used world government in your Washington Post op-ed.
I never use world government in anything. I use global governance, and I've been doing it religiously for decades.
Global governance is different from world government because?
Well, first of all, it's different in connotation. It doesn't freak out the black helicopter people quite as much, and the Elon Musks quite as much, and the Peter Thiels quite as much, and all the people who fear totalitarian world government. But also, it is the aspiration is different. I didn't expect there to ever be a centralized world government. I expect there to be overlapping international agreements and bodies, some of which are regional in nature, and some of which are this, and you address the problems as they come, and there's no single government handling them all. You have these different treaties, and they overlap sometimes, and it's just it's a more diffuse, ad hoc.
There's nothing in saying territorial dispute that says that DeSantis doesn't want to be involved in the world. I agree. He's probably not going to buy global governance, but he has your policy on Ukraine, and you're saying you don't like him because he has your policy on Ukraine, but he doesn't also believe in global governance. I just think that's overreacting a bit to those two words, which are unfortunate, but because he should have said more, but they're not wrong in themselves.
I was just using them to illustrate a larger point. It wasn't so much a comment on him. It was about my ideology and the rights and the difference between the two, because sometimes people conflate them. I mean, for example, Quincy is a think tank that is this diverse coalition of restrainers, and it includes people across the board. But there are differences within that coalition, and I'm just pointing to one. Now, I would steer people to a piece by Daniel Larison in his newsletter, Eunomia, where he makes the argument. I mean, you said that DeSantis is on Ukraine roughly where I am. Daniel makes the argument that DeSantis, judging by this statement, almost isn't anywhere in particular. It's a masterfully constructed statement that leaves him a ton of wiggle room, and in fact overlaps tremendously with Biden's position on Ukraine, and DeSantis, through a combination of kind of artful language and exaggerating how reckless Biden has been, manages to make it sound like there's some big difference. But Daniel says you read the thing, and it's not saying all that much.
He's rejecting the war of democracy versus autocracy, and he's rejecting the Anne Applebaum. We need to crush. We need to defeat Putin, and perhaps if he's deposed, that'd be great.
Look, and he succeeded in alienating them. Jennifer Rubin ran a Washington Post column whose headline was something like DeSantis comes out as a Putin apologist, MAGA. Something.
Well, you're a Putin apologist too. In the lights of these people,
I have been called one. I of course contend that I'm not. But
who do you think wrote it for DeSantis? My nominee is David Sachs.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think Sachs has sounded very supportive of DeSantis, but I have no idea what the relationship is. I assume they've met. I have no idea. DeSantis has foreign policy people.
I have some. He does? Okay. I have some idea. It seemed like
that thought crossed my mind. I wondered.
Anyway, it seemed like I love David Sachs. Sometimes he says things in a little doctrinaire way that sort of presented too neatly wrapped up, and the neatly wrapped up way to sell this to the American people is it's just a territorial dispute. We shouldn't even worry about it at all, when obviously we should worry about it. So it's a sort of thing
I haven't heard him use. I haven't heard him use that phrase, but
okay. Because you had a dialogue with him, and
he was on the podcast.
Hear it, and he didn't talk like that. Okay, so maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, that was
that reminds me.
You're right. He left himself a whole lot of wiggle room, but I just think you've confined him. You have this island of the dicks. Okay, you can find people who you say Peter Thiel is a dick, Trump is a dick, DeSantis is a dick, Elon Musk is a dick. I assume there are some people on the left who are dicks, and I thought of one last week, but I forgot who it was. But it's sort of like he can't do anything right. Has any of these dicks ever done something you thought was right that got them off the island of the dicks, at least temporarily?
Well, you know what? Whoever the head of Ford was, it was an actual Ford said to, what's his name? Lee Iacocca, when he fired him. And Iacocca asked why. You know what he said?
You're a dick and you're not my dick? No, what?
No, he said, sometimes you just don't like a person. And the people, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and Ron DeSantis rub me the wrong way, but I can actually articulate what I don't, think what I don't like about it. It's not personal.
Once you've turned them into Lee Iacocca, they can't escape. There's nothing they ever do that you ever give them credit for.
DeSantis
could have gone full neocon. He was a neocon in the past. He didn't do that. He should get some credit for it.
Let me just make one thing clear. There is an amount of money Elon Musk could give me that would transform my opinion of him, and it's in six figures. It's not even seven figures. Okay.
You wouldn't settle for a Tesla X?
No, I would have settled for the one before they lowered the price of the one just over 100,000. I would have, but they lowered it to like 99. And no, look, what do I do? What kind of person do you think I am? I mean,
that's the X. I didn't realize it was under 100,000.
Yes, it's got to be six figures.
Get some options. Anyway,
so I want to talk about Ukraine late at some point, but we've kind of talked. Maybe we should take a little break.
Speaking of Peter Thiel, elsewhere on your island of the dicks,
it's a good title for a sequel to Planet of the Apes or something. But
everybody thinks Peter Thiel sparked the run on Silicon Valley Bank because his founders fund sent a notice to its clients saying, which is true, this bank is troubled and it costs you nothing to move your money out. It's all upside if you move it out now. There's no downside. You might as well do it. But he himself told Julian Tett of the Financial Times that he had $50 million, which got stuck in Silicon Valley Bank. So he didn't get that money out. He was in the mess with everybody else.
Wait, he had how much money?
$50 million.
That's chump change to him, isn't it?
Chump change to him. I don't know.
It's not quite. No.
It's not quite chump change to
I don't know
anybody.
how many billions he has, actually.
I don't either. So,
anyway, my heart goes out. Thoughts and prayers. But
the point is, the government is faced with this weird situation where, in all these banks that are not too big to fail, if you're over the $250,000 insured limit, does the government insure you anyway, the way it did with Silicon Valley Bank? And the argument is, no, they shouldn't do it because that way, depositors can be a check on irresponsible bank managers. We have the investors who are checking them. The irresponsible bank managers would lose all their money if they irresponsibly manage the bank, as they did here. But the depositors can be an additional check. But as Matt Iglesias pointed out, no, depositors being a check means when they think a bank is in trouble, they move their money out. That is what happened here. They were being a check,
causes the panic,
and it was a disaster. So if that's the way you want to have accountability, discharged, you're going to have a lot of bank failures, and everybody's going to run to the big banks. The big banks are going to get all the money because they're too big to fail, and all the community banks are eventually going to be, wiped out. They're not. So there has to be some change. Either they have to raise the deposit limit radically, or what's so terrible about a system where all depositors are guaranteed and only the accountability system is just that if you're an irresponsible bank manager, you lose everything.
Well, I'm not sure that's enough. I mean, I also wonder if the insurance acquires a credibility problem, because the government, there's only so much money it can actually print without triggering hyperinflation. But let me say, speaking of David Sachs, he has an idea that largely makes sense. As I understand it, he's saying, first of all, you should distinguish between, personal accounts and corporate accounts. Corporate accounts, these people, they have to, as a practical matter, it's really hard for them to keep their accounts down to 250,000. Whereas most people you shouldn't have a problem with that. Take the rest and put it in a money market, put it in whatever, an index fund. There are very secure places to put it that will make you probably as much money as you'd make in a bank. That's not a problem, but there is a practical problem with corporate customers having accounts that small. And so banks that cater to them, as I understand his idea, on the one hand, those banks, all of the ceiling should be raised in terms of how much the government insures, but there should be a regulatory change that sounds simple in principle, but I have a question about it. And it's just this, that, banks have to submit evidence that their assets match their liabilities, right? The liabilities are, the deposit account, the fact that all these depositors could show up at any minute and demand their money back. They've got to have assets that counterbalance that. The problem is that the assets may not be liquid and they may drop in value. And that's what happened with this bank. They bought bonds at low interest rate. Then as interest rates went up, those bonds, their long-term value remained the same. But if they had to liquidate them suddenly, they were now worth less. And what Sachs says is that banks, at least these banks that would have the higher ceiling on deposit insurance, should have to do what's called mark to market. When you list your assets and show that they match your liabilities, you have to list the present day value of the assets. So if the treasury bond you're holding drops in value, you have to lower your listed assets. The question I have is, doesn't that require you to sometimes call up depositors and say, sorry, you got to get your money out of my bank. My total assets just dropped. I've got to cut my liabilities, right? I mean,
I think what he has in mind is that they have to drum up more capital.
Well, the mark-to-market idea is, I think separate from that. I mean, yeah, they would have to drum up more capital in that case, but how do you magically do that? Where do you can't just summon capital out of thin air? You got to buy your assets.
I think you sell shares and dilute your ownership stake.
Well, I suppose.
I'm going to turn off this heater. I think it's making noise. Hang on.
Okay. Meanwhile, I will share with people. While Mickey's away from the computer, I just like to point out that child tax credit is. Oh, whoops! There he is. So
there is some child tax credit news, but okay, we go.
First, Mickey, I wanted to say, did you hear about?
Exciting.
Did you hear about the Princeton news? Big Princeton news yesterday.
You beat Arizona.
Well, yes.
But everybody said you beat the number 1 team. They're only the number 2 team.
I know it is. I mean, first of all, let me say,
I think they're only the number 2 team in that bracket.
That's correct. It's a 16-team bracket. Yeah. It is almost like what they did in '96 when, as the number 16 seed, they knocked off number 1 UCLA. This time it was 15 knocking off 2, but still not nothing. And by the way, how's Harvard doing in the NCAA? Oh, that's right. I forgot they're not even in it. Sorry. Didn't mean to rub salt in that one.
I haven't followed Harvard basketball since James Brown was our star player.
The James Brown?
No, the somewhat portly gentleman who's like been a sportscaster for 50 years.
Harvard had a very good team a few years ago, but then I think they got into some trouble. But anyway, they had a losing season this year. And again,
congratulations
about that.
I guess,
yesterday, Arizona, tomorrow, Missouri. Mark my word.
I felt you might. Are you going to do the Tiger cheer for us?
I don't know.
That thing they do where they beat their chest.
I don't even. Here's something shameful. Yeah, that song, Old Nassau. I don't know the words. It's embarrassing. I know the chorus. 3 cheers for Old Nassau.
It's embarrassing if you know it. It's embarrassing if you don't know it.
Yeah.
So either way, you're in trouble. So the other issue with this, I don't know quite how to with the obviously you need, Sachs after basically lobbying for this bailout that the Silicon Valley Bank got and getting a lot of grief for it. How dare you, libertarian venture capitalists drum up a government bailout. He is for more government regulation of the sort that you say.
Right.
And obviously that's going to happen. Ro Khanna is
Ro Khanna for president. This is my weekly Ro Khanna for president.
Anyway, he may just be representing the Silicon Valley point of view. But there's going to be some more regulation. I agree that there's something out of balance with saying all depositors are insured, and this is just money for the managers to play around with. And if they screw up, well, they lose everything. But the downside isn't that great, and the upside is huge. So it's basically creating a perverse incentive for them to take wild risks. Maybe they could be held personally liable in some way, so there's an actual negative. Not just
like death
not
penalty?
just that they end up at zero, no, but they actually are liable for millions of dollars. The floor for them wouldn't be zero; you get nothing. The floor for them would be you owe millions of dollars if you screw up. I don't know. There is something out of whack.
No, but you're right. You're right that or I guess Matt Iglesias is right that there's a problem when the basic mechanics of the feedback system are also the mechanics of the panic. It's like.
Right, and I guess you could tell them, are people 100% protected if they go to a too big to fail bank? Maybe, maybe there should be a haircut involved in some of these options. If you go to a big to fail bank and it fails, you lose 10% or 5% or something. Mm-hmm. So the flight, it is an automatic no-brainer decision. Hey, I'm pulling my money out of a regional bank and taking it to the big five bank, which, as people point out, will lead to only 5 banks existing. I don't know.
Go ahead.
The second issue was this caused by wokeness? And there's a whole...
there's a Wall Street Journal piece that had a line that went something like, I'm not saying that things would have been fine if this bank had been run entirely by white males, but never started.
That was inartfully put. There was also an inartful New York Times debunking of that said, this idea that wokeness, racial preferences and wokeness destroyed this bank is crazy. They were, more racially diverse than other people, but it's not like they were like totally racially diverse, like as if it's like that. It's like this very bad joke. This joke that I once saw a black comedian give at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where he said, he's joking about being on a plane and he sees a black pilot and he says, "Good, brother, we're moving ahead." And then he sees that there are 2 black pilots and he goes, "Whoa, wait a minute. Okay." The New York Times, and nobody laughed. Nobody, even if they thought it was funny, they couldn't laugh. He got this joke totally bombed. But the New York Times was basically saying that. It's not like they had 2 black pilots, then they might have a case. No, that's not what the New York Times meant to say. They meant to say that even if they had a wildly diverse board, there's no reason to think it would be incompetence. So the competence issue is one. Everybody says, well, this bank went broke because they invested in these long-term funds without a hedge against rate increases. Well, why did they do that stupid thing? The anti-woke argument is they did it because they were incompetent. They were incompetent because they weren't chosen on the basis of competence. It's hard to refute that. You can't automatically refute it. It seems implausible to me.
Well, it's hard to refute it because you have no access to any evidence that would shed any light on it at all.
Well, there is some evidence that they were incompetent. They fucked up.
Well, collectively they were, but you have no idea who supported what on the board.
Right, but you can't refute it. You can't prove it. It seems implausible.
So it's is there life after death? And if you want to spend the rest of the podcast addressing that, we can. But can we talk about Ukraine or something?
I'm saying that this easy dismissal, this had nothing to do with wokeness, is way too easy because it might have. The other thing it might have done is all the wokeness might not have been window dressing. It might have been an actual distraction to these people. I think that's implausible too. I think it's more likely that they said, we're Silicon Valley, we're hot, and we don't have to hedge or something. I don't know. But
Well, I'm
unlikely to be wokeness, but you can't dismiss it.
I await evidence that these white males were saying, no, let's don't invest in long-term treasury bonds. I'm betting against it, but maybe it's there. So
it'd be more likely to anyway.
Yeah, whatever you're about to say was probably a good idea.
Look,
not to
I
say
know
it.
there's a railway, a famous two-street funicular railway in Los Angeles called Angel's Flight, and a couple of decades ago it was rebuilt by a female-headed construction team, and they were all got a lot of press because they gave this contract to a women's construction team. Okay, this thing fell apart. It's been in disrepair for 2 decades. They're not even fixing it. The construction team did a totally shitty job. Now, you can't prove that the construction team was incompetent because they were women, but it sure seems like a...
Wait, the actual people who did the constructing were women carrying the heavy stuff?
No, I don't think so. It was run by women or owned by women. It was, but it didn't turn out too well, and that's sort of the logical way you think, and it's more than just nothing. So here we had a diverse bank that fucked up, okay? Like the Angel Flight Railway fucked up.
You should write a piece. I think it's fascinating.
I think I shouldn't write a piece.
I think you should do whatever you want.
Do I get a free "this is not fascinating, let's move on" button I can push?
Yes, you do. You can always do that to me. It's just look, there's no evidence. You said what you want to say. We have no evidence that sheds light one way or another on this. I
agree.
I take your point. Everyone understands what you're saying. If you want to say more, go ahead. The floor is open.
Yeah,
and it just seems kind of silly to go around. It's just a classic tribal thing where everyone is bringing their presuppositions about what happened and no one has a fucking clue what happened. Because we don't have access to the evidence. Ukraine, I would say be concerned about the future of Ukraine because, so first of all, Bakhmut. I think I've been watching the comments of people all across the spectrum. Ardent Ukraine supporters, less ardent, Ukraine supporters, very sober and objective people who favor Ukraine, but are very sober and objective. Nobody thinks it's a good idea to keep trying to hang on to Bakhmut right now. And
except Zelensky.
And and among the prices they seem to be paying, there's a place called Ardvika, a town about half the size of Bakhmut. It's starting to look exactly like Bakhmut in the sense that the Russians are slowly enveloping it. And some people say it's because they had to take resources from there to try to persist in holding out in Bakhmut. And another problem, by the way, I don't know if you remember, but a few weeks ago I said, well, it looks like they could just leave Bakhmut, and then there's these hills to the northwest and southwest. They just occupy those, and they can rain hell down on Bakhmut. Because remember, Bakhmut is in a bowl. That's one reason it's not a strategically valuable town. Towns on hills can be strategically valuable. Bakhmut is in a bowl. You can rain artillery fire down on it. And it looks like I only just realized that apparently, at least according to this one seemingly authoritative tweet, what has happened now, the Russians now occupy that high ground because Ukraine concentrated their troops in the town because it was so symbolically important rather than put a bunch of them on those hills and defend the hills.
How many troops do they have?
I've heard up to 10,000. I don't know, thousands. And they did have more. There has been
it's not like 120 where it's like the Alamo, and if they get wiped out, they're a national cause.
No, but they're expending a lot of valuable ammunition. They are getting troops killed and maimed whom they're going to need. And they would have been, I think, much better off doing what I just suggested, backing up and trying to secure these hills or just getting the hell out of there because further back toward Kramatorsk and Slavansk, the bigger cities, the terrain is very favorable to defense. So even now that they've lost the highland, they're still right near Bakhmut. They're still better off vacating. Now, if you ask why are we doing this, well, I think it is political. Zelensky visited Bakhmut in December, vowed that it wouldn't fall. And the best guess is that it's become this big political thing for him. And what is worrying is that I think they may repeat this mistake with this coming offensive in the spring. I'm also hearing a lot of vibes like this offensive, things aren't looking that great for it. Because for one thing, to do an offensive as opposed to playing defense, you really need good and experienced troops. And they're mainly dead or maimed. There was I think it was a Washington Post piece that was really downbeat. And it quoted at length this Ukrainian battalion commander who has since apparently been demoted for speaking to the Washington Post reporter, who was just grimly candid. He's like, the troops these are all mobilized troops now that are showing up. And they don't want to be there. If they wanted to be there, they'd have already been there. They wouldn't have had to be mobilized. And right. There's a lot of that on the Russian side too. That's why both teams are well suited to defense, not to offense. And this guy was saying, look, these guys show up, they're literally afraid to fire a gun. The guys we're getting are hopeless. I mean, he was totally candid. He paid the price for his candor, but I've got a bad feeling about this, and yet I think they will persist. It's like a political issue, very much the way Bakhmut is a political issue. They've committed to it. They think they have to do it. They think they need a successful offensive to keep securing weapons from the West. At least that's how they got into it.
The argument they made on the radio yesterday was that they're sucking in Russian troops that otherwise would be deployed attacking other towns. So they're in effect protecting other towns by holding out until they can launch their offensives.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to that's the line. It's been the line all along. If you listen to Michael Kaufman, who seems pretty objective, though clearly pro Ukraine, he says, look, that made sense for a while. It made sense through December. The exchange ratio or whatever of casualties was very favorable to Ukraine, and he has trouble saying these things because he just came back from Ukraine. He always says, man, I love these Ukrainians. They're so gung-ho. I love hanging out with these guys. I think he is. I think maybe he was born in Ukraine or is of Ukrainian ancestry. So he's going to have trouble coming back and raining on their parade. But you can tell, like he says, this offensive, it can work. I mean, that's as far as he'll go. I don't think he'd bet money on it. And a lot of people are betting heavily against it. And let me just emphasize how disastrous I think it could be. Right now, I mean, they do have a lot of troops. They've been building up for this. They're mainly mobilized troops, okay, but they're training them. They're fresh, and they're going to go into this offensive, and they're going to get some equipment. They're going to get some, armored vehicles and so on. They're going to have some stuff to work with. I imagine America will go deeper into its own artillery ammo reserves than it has to make sure they're well stocked. But, when you're on offense, you take the brunt of the casualties. You're the one that gets chewed up. So they could well come out of this offensive suddenly lacking what I think they have now, which is the ability to hold the lines defensively all across the line for a very long time. And that could be catastrophic. And there's one other thing that worries me about it is just the way it plays into the question of, remember, Russia in principle has way more reserves to bring into the battlefield than Ukraine. That's the looming threat. They also have more ammo probably, but that's maybe soluble.
The Institute for the Study of War is constantly saying they're running out of ammo.
Yeah, some people think they are. It's not impossible, but of course, as we know, the Institute for the Study of War tends to stress themes like that. It's
yes, I was mocking them.
Yeah. And what worries me is, and the question is, how much does Putin feel he has the political support for mobilization? And I don't know. Russia's a black box to me, but it does seem to me that if Ukraine starts an offensive that is pointed at Crimea, which this offensive is almost certainly going to be, it's going to be in the south, and they start making some inroads, which they will, and Putin can say they're coming after Crimea, which an overwhelming majority of Russians, as I understand it, wants Russia to hang on to. he'll have an easier time mobilizing than if Ukraine just plays defense, strengthens their lines all along the way, and just says, okay, come at us. And every time Russia tries, they get chewed up. And so it becomes a kind of stalemate. At that point, he's going to have more trouble calling up more troops, I think. The Russians are going to say, like, why don't we just do a peace deal? Nothing's happening. So I don't know. I'm very worrid.
There's a lot of news about these airplanes. Poland promising for jet fighters. I think they're MiGs, and they're somewhere along the way they got some American planes that take 6 months to train for. But are they a decisive advantage? Why not wait for them to launch your offensive? Can they? If they get 4 planes, can these 4 planes suddenly start attacking Russian troops around Bakhmut, or do they immediately get shot down by Soviet planes? My impression is that Russia does not control the airspace. I don't know what that means, but I guess it means they have dogfights.
Ukraine has had MiGs all along, and I don't think they've all gotten shot down. So I don't think this would be transformational. The F-16 is a better plane, I'm sure, but what Kaufman says is, look, in order of priority, what you need is more artillery ammunition, more artillery barrels because they wear out, more anti-aircraft missiles, ammunition, and more anti-aircraft installments. And then after that, I think he'd go with more armor, including tanks, but also at least as important, probably infantry vehicles. I think he'd say all that before he got to planes. So I don't. I think all that is overdone. The plane stuff.
Okay.
And look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the offensive will go great, but it worries me. And I don't know. I don't think it's the way to wrap this war up fast. And I just worry it's going to lead to only bad things for Ukraine itself.
Well, if you think a deal comes when both sides are pessimistic, that would take care of the Ukrainian side.
Yeah, exactly. But it would be asymmetrical. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Then if Ukraine is so depleted that Russia can push toward the Dnipro river, it can break through somewhere. Then Russia doesn't want to do that. That's why I'm saying man the defensive lines and turn it into a stalemate. And we should be encouraging that. And we should not leave them under the impression that the only way we won't completely desert them is if they stage this probably long shot offensive, which will have some gains, fine. But I just, maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, what else is there?
The country that's being deserted is not Ukraine, it's Israel. Did you see that poll? On majority of Democrats now favor the Palestinians over the Israelis.
But the majority of
Democrats, not Republicans, but it's like 45 to 37.
Wait, what was the reading of the poll? It said, "Who do you like better, Palestinians?"
I think it's like it was sort of like who are you rooting for in this fight?
Yeah. Oh, come on! I mean,
whose side are you on? Well, that says something, and the answers say something, and it is stunning that the Democratic Party would turn against Israel. That's just stunning. I don't know what to make of it, but it's very, very dramatic.
Well, it's funny. I was just watching this very good documentary by Julia Baca called "It's Either Boycott or the Boycott." It's about all the laws in the states that are that punish support. It's like the case in Texas was a woman had been working as a speech pathologist for the state, for the university or the state. She had a state contract, and all of a sudden she gets a contract, and it says if you want to keep your contract, if you want to keep working in the state, you have to pledge that you will not boycott Israel or support a boycott for Israel. And it's clear free speech issue. The Supreme Court has in the civil rights era ruled that a boycott, as I understand it, was protected speech. So anyway, it's a good documentary, really worth watching. But the interesting thing to me is I had heard that, Bibi has kind of given up on, he relies so heavily on the Christian evangelical part of his American base that he barely bothers with Jews anymore. And there's this scene in the documentary, and the boycott thing. Israel and the Israel lobby were involved in setting up these laws. They're basically identical laws that have been passed in most American states. This just like boilerplate language that these that were sent to these conservatives. And there's a scene where the rabbi of the largest synagogue in Little Rock, says, I didn't even hear about this law until after it was passed. So the Israel lobby wasn't even bothering to go through the Jewish power structure, right? They're like, no, we can just do it with evangelicals, and it's easier. And I think that's what and the legislator that they interviewed from Arkansas was this hardcore evangelical, and they get him to admit with some regret that yes, the Jews will go to hell if they don't see the light before Armageddon, and it's coming. But still, he's very anti-boycott.
I'm not sure that's true. I once heard a very detailed account of Armageddon, and the Jews just get thrown in with everybody else, and there's a big 1,000-year fight. They don't go directly to hell.
Right. Which account was this?
I forget. I just think that's a myth.
Was that in did you watch the Left Behind movies?
This was from one of the authors of the Left Behind books.
Behind. Well, he would know better than I what's going to happen.
It's the Jews are there with the people who have deposits over $250,000.
But anyway, yes. I mean,
they're not protected, but they're not necessarily consigned to hell.
Look, for years and years, the Israeli government has been making it easy for liberal Democrats to get alienated by it. I mean, Bibi himself, first of all, but the current government, I talked about it a week or two ago. I mean, these guys are scary.
What is Bibi the big loser? I haven't found anybody who actually, well, there was one person who said it in this rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I mean, Bibi was trying to have a big anti-Iran coalition, and if the Saudis are making nice with Iran, that would seem to distract it. I also saw another account that said, well, do not be fooled. Iran and Saudi Arabia will not be friends. They just recognize each other diplomatically. You said this was a good thing for the region. Why is it a good thing for the region? And
well, if it helps wind down the war in Yemen, I mean, that's essentially a proxy war between Iran and, I mean, there were local issues for a long time, civil war and so on, but it has become to some extent a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And if it's a horrible thing, tons of people are suffering and dying, and I mean, not at the rate that they were, I think, but if they can actually bring it to a final resolution, that would be wonderful. Now, I've heard conflicting reports. I just heard a podcast last night where some guy said Israel they're not all that deeply concerned about this thing. But I've also heard that they are, so I don't know.
It's weird. When Trump killed Soleimani, Soleimani's defenders were saying he was there to negotiate a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, and you killed him just as he was about to negotiate this deal. That now seems quite plausible.
Yeah, was it Saudi Arabia? Anyway, yes, there was some sort of Persian Arab deal he was trying to apparently broker or be part of, and that's, I think, why he was in Iraq. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, don't remind me. I mean, Trump was such a, we had the nuclear deal, and the Trump was just disastrous.
If Saudi Arabia now invests heavily in Iran, that means the sanctions are ineffective and the nuclear deal isn't going to happen, right?
Oh, I mean, I don't think Saudi Arabia has the potential to, alleviate nearly all the strain Iran feels from the sanctions. But look, that thing is, at this point, I don't know. I mean, the Biden administration has never seemed to very vigorously pursue restoration of the deal. They didn't seem that interested from the get-go.
So we put John Kerry on the case, didn't they? No, they didn't.
No, that was post Kerry. They did have Rob Malley, who in theory should be good, But there was, I mean, and I think in fairness, they were getting a pushback from like Bob Menendez in the Senate, who maybe was holding up nominations and so on, and making it hard for them to.
Bob Menendez is a Democratic candidate for the island of the Dicks.
He's totally bad news, 100% bad news.
Okay, so he's a Democrat on your island, so that's one.
Yeah, it's a little different. I mean, he's just substantively, ideologically trouble. Yeah.
He also has one of the worst reputations for corruption of anybody in the Senate.
He keeps getting almost indicted. I mean, do it.
Oh, he did get indicted. He got put on trial, didn't he?
Oh, okay. He keeps getting almost convicted.
He got acquitted. Yeah.
Now, Mickey, this alarm rang about 7 minutes ago, which means we're approaching the hour mark. We should probably adjourn. Do you have anything critical? Not critical in the sense of like critical Bob, but critical in the sense of important.
Critical to our national interests.
Yes.
Not a mere.
Do you have anything of existential importance?
Not a mere territorial dispute. No, we can go right to the Parrot room. There are things to talk about in the Parrot room.
Yeah. Let me say quickly, by the way, just footnote to the Xi Jinping deal. Now he has announced he's going to speak to Zelensky for the first time since the war started. It's apparently going to happen. He's going to meet Putin in Moscow. Then he's going to talk to Zelensky by remote video. At least the Wall Street Journal reported this. So I'm trying to start the meme that like there should be like a big conflict between China and the U.S. in terms of who can do the most diplomacy. Like Biden and Xi should compete for top diplomat.
It is weird. I agree that if Xi can cut a deal, that'd be great. It is weird that we pulled back from the Middle East and all of a sudden they all seem to be loving each other. I mean, the results of our vacuum. This vacuum was filled by a bunch of peace deals.
As I said in the Parrot room last week, we are structurally ill-positioned to do good in the Middle East. I'll leave it at that.
And if China is structurally positioned to do good, so much the better.
And they actually are kind of, I think, yeah. They just got less in the way of vested interests in the local actors going in. They can be more of an honest broker.
And do you think if they gain respect as a world player in terms of diplomacy, that sort of alleviates their paranoia? Probably not.
Yeah, actually,
they might feel less encircled.
It might, but I mean, first of all, if Biden and Xi do this thing where they're competing for diplomatic successes, the world will just be a giant love blob, Mickey, and all the problems will be solved.
We're not competing. We're not in that competition because, as you say, we're ill-suited to win it.
No, but that's just in the Middle East. There's places where we could succeed.
Okay. You know that the war in Kosovo might heat up again. There's moves in Serbia to take it over.
Yeah, you may know more about that than I do.
No, I just read a blurb of it, but maybe we could cut a peace deal there. What the hell?
Okay. So what do you want to talk about in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room, where people who wish us well can come support us and listen to the way we talk when we have our hair down, so to speak. Oh, sorry, I hit another soft spot there.
Because I don't have hair to let down?
I wasn't going to put it quite like that, Mickey.
Okay.
But as long as you mentioned it, that is the case.
Artificial intelligence, Bob. You wrote a very good article.
Oh, you read it?
There's a wrinkle. But
do you have a criticism? Good. Bring it on.
We'll do that in the Parrot room. Not a big criticism. There's that. There is some hilarious SBF news.
Oh, good.
There's
they're trying to ban TikTok. I got a thing or two to say about that.
Okay.
There's a virtually Silicon Valley wide conspiracy to ban TikTok.
There's do you still defend the Metaverse? Did you ever defend the Metaverse? There was a hilarious article in Esquire about what a pathetic, lonely loser place it is.
I've had tremendous success there.
Really?
Actually,
You have
actually
people
I've never been there.
you found people who believe in global governance there?
In planetary love blobs.
Um,
I haven't been there, but I do in the long run. That is where we're all headed. That, and then the GUI pods that the AI is going to stuff us into. And by the way, the article you alluded to is in my Nonzero newsletter. It's called "Okay, It's Time to Freak Out About AI." And by the way, it's gotten like more than 15,000 hits from a place called Y Combinator News, which is apparently associated with Y Combinator, I guess. But
Y Combinator is where my friend Richard Rushfield went to raise capital for his publication, The Ankler.
Well, and the current head of OpenAI came from Y Combinator, Sam something.
Yeah. We have, let's see, the great drummer Jim Gordon died.
Okay.
Things to say about him.
Oh, I want to talk about Stevie Wonder on drums.
We have, is Dukakis too wine track or too beer track, or do we not care about wine track and beer track?
Possibly the latter.
There is a new feature symbolized by this: brushes with greatness.
Mickey's holding up a toothbrush right now, folks.
Mickey's brush with greatness with
it's a pun, kind of,
with the actress Mira Sorvino, whose father was left out of the in memoriam segment on the Academy Awards.
You had a brush with her?
She is rightly pissed off about it.
Okay, we'll talk about that. We can talk about. We can also talk about.
I'm holding a small brush.
We can also talk about other Oscar-related things.
And
I want to talk about a documentary. This is the Stevie Wonder thing. A documentary I saw called Summer of Soul.
It's supposed to be very good. Anyway, and Sly Stone is 80.
Sly and the Family Stone?
I hope he's still not still living in his Studebaker.
Was he homeless at one point?
He was living in his Studebaker.
He was always a little carefree, shall we say. He was known for showing up for concerts long after they had ended.
No, he lost all his money.
Yeah.
So there were people trying to get money back for him. I don't know if they succeeded. Anyway,
we digress.
Plenty to talk about.
Yeah. I may even talk more about, who knows, Ukraine, bank reform, and how about those Princeton Tigers, folks?
And I can elaborate on my "you don't want to be number 2, you want to be number 3" theory of romance.
Yeah, because that was a real.
That was a hit.
That was captivating. Yeah.
Okay,
we'll be doing that. All right, Parrot Room, Patreon.com/Parrot Room.
Won't you be my number 2?
Won't you be my number 2?
Or failing that, smash the like button. See you around.